lot of ways, this dinner sums up my first 2 years in office. I'll talk for 10 minutes, take 0 questions, and cheerfully walk away.
That's funny because it's true, Joe. Curtis Houck is here, managing editor at Media Research Center. You have most certainly seen newsbusters.com. They're all part of the CM group. Curtis, how you doing, brother?
Doing good. Good to be with you, my friend.
So in all the years that you've been at Media Research Center, researching the media, how have you seen it change over the last, whatever you think, a decade? Or it's been moving fast, so even maybe just the last few years.
Yeah, I was going to say I've been at the Media Research Center in various capacities for about a decade. So just in the decade, and I was one of those nerds who was reading about the media, reading Bernie Goldberg and all those people back in like middle school. So I could just say that, the media has become so singularly focused. They don't cover as many stories as they used to. We saw this during the Trump era. They would focus on the Mueller investigation. CNN, for example. In an hour-long newscast, they'd spend 40, 45 minutes talking about the Trump story of the day. And then the other 15 minutes, oh, by the way, here's like 4 other things that are probably a lot more relevant to you, but we're going to run through them in a couple of seconds. And people realize outside of the resistance base, the media doesn't really represent me. Number one, they don't cover the stories that really matter to them. A tornado could have blown through a major town or something like that. Or, there's a water crisis. Really, you could name anything, and it really doesn't get covered. And then when it does get covered, there are things that are missing. You see that with the border crisis. Things that they often portray it over the last couple of years of things that just happened to the president. You saw this a lot under Barack Obama. The VA scandal, a lot of the NSA issues, the IRS spying on the Tea Party and Tea Party groups. They just happened to the president. And Americans just look at this and saying, wait, if something like this happened under my watch, I would be held accountable. I would lose my job. So you just have a media that don't represent you. And then finally, the White House Correspondents' Dinner, I think we've seen over the last decade an even further, intertwining of the press corps and Washington. They want to be seen together at the same parties. The rise of social media has allowed there to be, greater sunlight for those of us to kind of see, and people outside of politics to see how people from the press and people they're supposed to be covering are intertwined. They hang out together. They're married. Their kids go to the same schools. There's a geographic bias that, Steve Krakauer has talked about as well. That is a huge problem in the press, but it goes a lot beyond that because they also share the same sorts of views. They have the same sorts of views about the world, and they believe you should care as much as they do and respect them. And I would just say, lastly, there's this book that a lot of journalists read by these 2 guys, Kovac and Rosenstiel. It's been re-edited multiple times over the years. And one of the biggest things they talk about is maintaining independence from the people you cover. But when, they're hanging out at parties together, snapping selfies, or they're kind of their lives are intertwined. We saw that with the WikiLeaks dump of the Podesta emails. They throw parties for each other. You're saying, why should we trust you?
There's so many good points there. What was that book you mentioned at the end?
I think it's Elements or Fundamentals of Journalism. It's either
is like a college textbook. It seems like a very 101 thing, or is it more of an analysis of?
It's just like a regular book. It's only a couple hundred pages. You can find it in Barnes and Noble, like the current affairs section. They had a recent edition that came out, I don't know, maybe a decade ago. But I read it in college, and it's just a lot of really basic kind of stuff. And one of those things is maintaining independence from the people you cover. And there should be sorts of disclosures if that's going to be the case. CBS, for well over a decade, they've had Gayle King hosting their CBS morning show. She donated to the Obamas and the Democratic Party during his run for president. That is never disclosed. She was on CBS for multiple segments, and they teased her 10 different times during the show a few weeks ago. And there was no mention of that, or how she goes on vacation with the Obamas. That was a thing a number of years ago, and she thought it's really not that big of a deal. Yes, it actually is a really big deal.
Well, how about my favorite is Donna Brazile moderating a debate and giving the questions to Hillary before the debate. And she still has a job. She shouldn't be working anymore ever in media. But if she does, every time she's introduced, it should be, hey, here's Donna Brazile. Remember, she gave the questions to Hillary before the debate. Donna, what do you think about any particular issue? People need to know that that's how crooked it is.
There's a level of shamelessness in the media for sure.
Yeah.
You know, Don Lemon's going to land on his feet somewhere. Chris Cuomo, he
Really?
landed at News Nation, which is a disappointment in my opinion because I really like News Nation by and large. You have Brian Williams. Brian Williams, he lied about being shot at in Iraq. He lied about seeing bodies in New Orleans. I'm probably missing a few other examples. He was brought in then as MSNBC breaking news anchor, dragged out during big news events. And then he was given for years an 11 p.m. show that people just celebrated. You know, I think there are a few sins that are greater in journalism than just lying and making things up. But as we've seen over the last few years, you can get your job. Or even Lilia Luciano, she's a random correspondent, general assignment correspondent at CBS News. She got in trouble at NBC News for editing the 911 call involving George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin at NBC News. You doctor, you know, a phone call and nothing really happens to you. You land on your feet at another network. If this were any other profession, I don't think this would be allowed. And where you talk about
what's the expression? The expression is you'll never work in this town again. That's like the old-timey threat with the fist in the air, and that's just not a thing in the media world. Let me ask you this, Curtis. We see a lot of people going down, right? Chris Wallace, CNN has like no ratings. You mentioned Brian Stelter, or whatever. There's a lot of failure happening. So what is next? Give us like 5 years in the future of the media landscape. What are you seeing that's good or bad?
You know, I would have said that when Chris Licht came in, CNN might change. CNN might actually be going back to doing the news again. But as we've seen 1 year into his tenure, it's more of the same. I predict that CNN is going to continue to plummet. They are well behind MSNBC. Liberals know if you want real liberal programming, you go to MSNBC. Rich White Liberal Wine Mom Story Hour with Nicole Wallace, great example of that. Joy Reid, who just says things that just aren't true all the time. CNN will continue to crumble into irrelevancy. You know, News Nation, The First, Newsmax, clipping at CNN's heels. CNN will become even less relevant. The major newspapers, they will continue to be siloed. I think that's the worst thing about it, and I think conservatives should really push back on. You hear all the time, NPR and the like, they always talk about silos. Your conservatives are in silos. Too many Americans are in silos, and they only look at news that they want to hear. Tamara Keith, I think, talked about this, the White House correspondent there. She's the NPR correspondent there. And it's like, no, you guys are the ones who are in silos, and you're driving Americans away. So I would just say that, you know, they're going to continue to lose relevance. They'll continue to lash out and say that we are the problem and not really look inward. So I think for now, we're just going to continue to see a further splintering of the news media. And, you know, that's maybe that's not the best news some people want to hear, but it is what it is. And I would just say with newspapers, you'll see them continue to shrink. You know, I think maybe we could see major papers stop printing certain days of the week or shut down altogether. When's the last time you heard USA Today have relevance, for example?
Yeah, you're right. Good point. Yeah, more free fall coming. But then hopefully some more good can rise out of that. Curtis Houck, Managing Editor, Media Research Center, of course, newsbusters.com. Thanks, Curtis. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Mike.
Hey, thanks for watching that clip about the media, about it seems like it's all collapsing and what will rise from the ashes. The whole special is available on the First TV's app, which you can download for free, and also our Politics by Faith podcast, because in this special, we also ask a very interesting question. Should Christians watch the news? Should Christians be engaged in politics? There's so much lying and cheating, and it's just like, it's a mess, right? So should we even engage in such a messy worldly game? I believe the answer is yes. And we explain why in our podcast, Politics by Faith. You can download it everywhere, Politics by